Now we have Hsuan Su. Hello, Hsuan. Hello. Thank you for joining us. And Hsuan is a professor of English at the University of California, Davis. And he's the author of The Smell of Risk, Environmental Disparities and Olfactory Aesthetics, NYU Press 2020. His research in the areas of American literature and culture, race studies, environmental humanities, and sensory studies has been supported by the American Academy of Arts and Science, the Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Program, the National Endowment of the Humanities, stands for University Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Science, and the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies. And Hsuan's speech is named Olfactory Futures and More Than Human Intimacy. Thank you very much, Hsuan.
Thank you. And I want to apologize for not sending you a guide to pronouncing my name. It's Sean Shu. I'd like to start by saying how thrilled I am to be here and to thank Anicka, Romina, Ariana, and Giovanna for putting together this exciting event and for inviting me. In her foundational essay, Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power, Truth, Freedom, Sylvia Wynter argues that the histories of colonialism and slavery have been sustained by the Western bourgeois conception of, quote, man, which overrepresents itself as if it were the human itself. Installing this white patriarchal bourgeois figure as the bearer of freedom and rationality required drawing a sharp distinction between privileged figures of white rationality with supposed, quote, mastery over their own sensory irrational nature, and figures of otherness who are, quote, made to embody the postulate of enslavement to the lower sensory aspects of human nature. Deodorization, by which I mean both efforts to eradicate most smells in bourgeois spaces and the devaluation of olfaction as a mode of knowledge and relation, played an important part in establishing this fantasy of white masculinity as an embodiment of autonomous rational personhood. In order to maintain the idea of sensory mastery, the so-called lower chemical sense of smell is generally restricted to a narrow scope of commodified fragrances, deracinated from their place-based relationships. Meanwhile, in context of racial violence and colonial dispossession, smell has been deployed to stigmatize racialized bodies through exposure to the stench of technologies such as slave ships, prisons, waste sites, and skunk water, an olfactory weapon used almost exclusively on Palestinian communities. But as biologists, multi-species ethnographers, material feminist thinkers, and our own embodied experience all tell us, smell opens onto compelling forms of knowledge, desire, and relation that refuse the constraints of white male colonial humanity. Defying containment and control, smell reaches beyond the boundaries of individual bodies and even species, binding and mixing a vast range of bodies connected by shared atmospheres. To invoke the title of Anicka Yi's stunning bacterial installation, smell is a manifestation of force majeure, a greater force beyond our control that suspends individual autonomy in contract law. If smell is relational, the relations it realizes are always changing and open-ended. Smell engages us in unruly intimacies, relationships across bodies, spaces, and species that realize alternatives to colonial conceptions of white, heteronormative, autonomous man. Olfactory experience presents ecological modes of perceiving and intermingling, perceiving as intermingling. In the rest of my talk, I'll share some literary and multimodal works by Black and Asian diasporic artists that take a speculative approach to smell. Works in which smell offers a pathway to possibilities for intimacy, intelligence, relation, and futurity that are imperceptible to a colonial sensorium premised on ocular centrism, sensory control, and containment. In these works, a range of ancestral and emergent technologies enact feminist and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, practices of sensory intelligence as a route to more than human intimacies, a more ecological view of the human as inherently multi-species and relational. In the suffocating atmospheres of the slave ship, the factory, the tenement, the prison cell, and a range of environmental sacrifice zones, Black people have struggled to produce and maintain what Christina Sharp calls microclimates supportive of Black life. Folk traditions like conjure or hoodoo deployed aromatic materials and as technologies of resistance and life support. Although folk practices were deracinated and commodified in the 20th century, Black urban communities continued to access conjure or hoodoo through a variety of media. As Carolyn Long has documented, a range of scented products, including perfumes, incense, powder sachets, candles, fumigants, room cleaners, roots, and oils, circulated through mail order catalogs and spiritual supply stores beginning in the 1920s. Customers attributed magical powers to these materials, including the capacity to improve health, ward off enemies, purge harmful spirits, inspire love, and even influence legal decisions through the practice of dusting the courtroom. Though often dismissed as superstition, the olfactory elements of conjure promised recent Black migrants to the city some control over the disproportionately polluted, poorly ventilated atmospheres they inhabited and inhaled. These products connected the atmospheres of urban homes with syncretic traditions that span Black diasporic geographies throughout the Atlantic world. For example, Van Van oil, a popular product, features the scent of vetiver, a grass native to Africa as well as Asia and cultivated in subtropical regions such as Louisiana. Used for luck and power, its fragrance also evoked senses of place and diasporic longings far removed from the city's noxious and deodorized spaces. For urban Black practitioners of conjure, smells' capacities to evoke collective and individual memories and to alter mood and behavior may exert considerable, though not easily measurable, effects on physical and mental health. These connections between material, atmospheres, spirituality, and health are central to Renee Stout's hoodoo-inspired installations. Stout has devoted much of her practice to developing exhibitions that explore African and African syncretic spiritual practices. Stout characterizes her artistic persona, Fatima Mayfield, as, quote, a mysterious seer, herbalist, and root worker who can best be described as Zora Neale Hurston meets the science fiction writer Octavia Butler in The Matrix. For Stout, hoodoo and conjure are not fixed traditions, but living practices that have much to contribute to Black futurity and liberation. Stout's Tales of the Conjure Woman brings together a mysterious, evocative, and multisensory assemblage of works held together by the persona of Fatima Mayfield. The exhibition features a range of media: glass sculptures of hoodoo roots, a vending machine that appears to dispense roots and herbs, drawings of figures Fatima saw in dreams, and installations that include scented materials such as roots and perfumes. The exhibition includes a number of embedded plots: plans for seducing a man, a pilgrimage to the tomb of the Vodun practitioner Marie Laveau, and a Christian minister's opposition to hoodoo. Together, these stories frame the conjure woman as a threat to both patriarchal hierarchies and the church's spiritual authority. Fatima flips the patriarchal script of seduction, deploying the redolent materials of hoodoo to enhance the erotic agency of Black women. Stout's work frequently alludes to the material and spiritual importance of scent in hoodoo practices. One etching presents a set of, quote, notes for the seduction of Sterling Rochambeau, in which the focus is almost entirely on the seductive capacities of different perfume brands. The root worker's work table, pictured here, includes a similar list of, quote, things I'll need for the seduction of Sterling Rochambeau: Adam and Eve roots, buckeye, five-finger grass, ginseng, ginger, lady slipper orchid, orris root, saffron, vanilla, vetiver, patchouli, and Shalimar perfume. Other works include scented powders that perfume bottles, which visitors could uncork and sniff. One reviewer reports, quote, the sense of musk and flowers may dominate, but just as symbolically important is the aroma of earth from graveyards and ultimately from Africa. Scented materials enable Stout to materialize the atmosphere of conjure, making her installation not just a representation, but an immersive performance. As she explains, the olfactory ritual aspects of her work signal, quote, an effort to promote healing and evoke the protective energies of ancestral spirits. Through the sense of roots and perfumes, Fatima's magic permeates, penetrates, and transforms the bodies and psyches of visitors. So the second section is called perfuming. The first was called conjure. I forgot to say that. The global trade in perfumes, valued at about 30 billion, centers commodities for metropolitan elites that fetishize exotic locales while erasing histories of bioprospecting, dispossession, colonial terraforming, and plantation labor. Yet perfumes are an inherently interspecies technology composed of scents extracted from a range of flora and fauna. Can perfumes do justice to the life worlds from which their scents are extracted? Can they be redirected from their function as technologies of colonial erasure and bourgeois distinction towards social justice and healing? Can perfumes support memories and affective capacities that have been marginalized by Western colonial smellscapes? Tana Is, a Bangladeshi-American writer and perfumer, models the practice of olfactory biography and aromatic care in their Mala podcast and perfume project. Mala, an acronym for memory as living art that also evokes flowers in Sanskrit and bad women in Spanish, features interviews in which Tana Is holds space for 5 formerly incarcerated women to, quote, retell their stories of survival and reimagine them as scents. Drawing on these interviews, Tana Is creates perfumes intended to support the memories and well-being of Black women whose sensory lives have been dampened by years spent in alternately deodorized and malodorous carceral spaces. Tana Is explains that, quote, a prison is the very absence of scent, of sensuality. There's only staleness. One of her subjects, Sharon, describes her release from incarceration in sensory terms. Do you want to know what it smelled like the day I left prison? The day I left prison? Freedom. I smelled the air. I felt seawater. I smelled all the things that were happy for me when I was a child. The crystalness of the sun and the water. I smelled curry. I smelled, like I was out the door. Bringing these impressions together, Tana Is created a perfume for Sharon that blends, quote, blood cedar, seaweed, turmeric, pimento berry, allspice, and amber and ocean. Like the aromatic elements of conjure, these scents evoke connections across species, as well as the place-based life worlds and lived relations that Sharon associates with materials like seaweed, turmeric, and allspice. After spending 25 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit, Claude, pictured here, now wears a range of perfumes, including some inherited from her mother, a Vaudin practitioner who created her own fragrances. Drawing on Claude's memories, Tana Is creates a perfume that's, quote, bright and tropical, inspired by her youth, her Haitian heritage, a perfume as a getaway. The top sparkles with juicy citrus notes of white and pink grapefruit and bergamot, an homage to her father's cologne. For the heart, I go full-on tropics, gardenia core and fatty coconut milk. And the base is an amber musk reminiscent of sacred incense, Vaudin, and her mother, where Claude's life began, end quote. This perfume as a gateway is not an exoticizing escape from Claude's reality, but a gathering of her scent-based memories and Haitian heritage. This is especially important because being incarcerated for 25 years has eroded Claude's childhood memories. Tana Is's perfumes deploy smells powerful connections across space, time, and species. Its restorative evocation of places, times, and human and more than human intimacies to support Black women living in the wake of the prison's interruptions of time, place, community, and sensory experience. These individual perfuming experiments provoke speculation about how we might approach perfuming in ways that distribute the memories and affective possibilities afforded by smell more justly. Part 3, speculative narratives. In her 2002 novel, Saltfish Girl, the Chinese-Canadian writer and critic Larissa Lai builds a world suffused in the pungent odors that have often been referenced by racial stereotypes about the smell of Asiatic bodies. Whereas white supremacists cite culinary odors in efforts to denigrate, exoticize, and/or shut down Asian immigrant foodways with all their ties to cultural identity and psychological and physical health, Lai dwells on the queer racialized sensory excess that characterizes the odors of durian and saltfish. These intense odors communicate with Lai's characters on both cultural and genetic levels, offering possibilities for interspecies kinship and queer of color reproduction that exceed the erotic constraints of the patriarchal heteronormative family. Saltfish Girl consists of 2 interwoven plots set in 19th century China and in and around a walled city on the west coast of Canada between the years 2044 and 62. The first thread features an incarnation of the half-serpent, half-human goddess Nu Wa, who falls in love with the daughter of a saltfish merchant. Quote, she stank of that putrid but nonetheless enticing smell that all good South Chinese children are weaned on, its flavor being the first to replace that of mother's milk. The dystopian future storyline focuses on Miranda Ching, a young woman whose body emits the sulfurous odor of durian. The two plots intersect when Miranda falls in love with a clone named Evie, who smells of saltfish because in order to bypass legal regulations on human cloning, she is genetically, quote, 0.03% freshwater carp. Miranda turns out to be another incarnation of Nuwa, connected to the goddess by the material agency of a mutated durian. Early on, Miranda describes the scene of her conception, which occurred when her father brought her mother an illicit durian. Quote, its intriguing and illicit odor both inspires and suffuses her parents' intercourse. Quote, again, as they tumble to the floor, it tumbled between them, its pepper pissy juices mixing with their somewhat more subtly scented ones and the blood of the injuries it inflicted with its green teeth. The novel presents the durian as a sexual participant, tumbling, secreting, and penetrating alongside Miranda's human parents. Miranda's story begins with several pages of olfactory description, conveying not only the odor of durian, but the subtle ways in which Miranda's scent permeated her family home, oozing, swirling, creeping, rushing, pouring into every space and orifice. The verbs in this extended catalog underscore the unruly material agency of scent as it transgresses the architectural and bodily boundaries of a heteronormative household. Miranda, pressured by her father, at first attempts to deodorize herself, but after leaving her family home, Evie's pungent scent presents her with a moment of olfactory recognition. Quote, I caught a whiff of something subtler and infinitely sweeter, and I myself was shocked by this odd glimpse of clarity, this moment of knowing. Miranda perceives Evie's scent as a passage to an alternate world. Like the smell of saltfish, the durian's odor expands across time and space to encompass Nuwa's lifetimes since the beginning of the world. But smell also impels towards the future. Evie leads Miranda to a collective of fugitive feminist clones who reproduce by eating the impregnated fruit of a mutated durian tree. The interspecies fertility of these fruits is explained by the 19th century storyline, which concluded when Nuwa blended her essence with and into a durian seed. This revelation suggests that Miranda is not her father's daughter, but the durian's. Miranda eats one of the mutated durians herself, and the novel concludes with her giving birth in a sulfurous hot spring whose water transforms her lower body into a fish's tail. In this, quote, story about how life grows out of the most fetid smelling places, smells solicit us toward queer interspecies intimacies that cut across centuries, heteronormative reproductive arrangements, and species boundaries. In Lai's vision of a dystopian future characterized by environmental illness, pollution, walled corporate settlements, and the exploitation of labor performed by racialized, feminized, not quite human clones, the unruly fecundity of pungent smells solicits us towards suppressed histories and queer interspecies worlds. So I'm going to conclude briefly with Anicka Yi's provocative biofictional installation, In Love with the World, a speculative ecology in which humans and their microbiotic companion species coexist with artificial intelligence aerobes in a shared atmosphere suffused with the smellscapes of different historical and prehistorical epochs. By juxtaposing carefully constructed renderings of past smellscapes with flying robots, Yi insistently connects the smells of the past with the urgent task of imagining a livable future. She frames In Love with the World as an atmospheric space of, quote, biological entanglement, where microbial and chemical components of scent influence both human and more than human sensation and behavior. At stake here is the possibility of realizing technologies that sense and respond to the more than human world in complex, embodied ways. As Yi explains, quote, most AI functions like a mind without a body, but living organisms learn so much about the world through the senses. What if AI could learn through the senses? Could machines develop their own experience of the world? Could they exchange intelligence with plants, animals, and microorganisms? The speculative olfactory relations I've explored today affirm that the embodied, visceral, and materially relational sense of smell may be crucial to the project of designing minoritarian, feminist, technological intelligences that diverge from the ocular-centric, distance, and ratiocinative values of colonial embodiment. Yi's monumental work exemplifies how historical and interspecies sense can be activated to generate new intimacies and alternate futures, to solicit human and non-human, even machined beings towards worldly, chemical, and microbial experiences of love. So that is the end. I hope I didn't go over time, and thank you all. I'm happy to take questions if there is time.